Far away, in the highlands of East Africa, the air is thin and cool. It is the late evening of a world far older than the one we know. The year is not measured in numbers. It is measured in the turning of seasons, in the rise and fall of rains. Here, in the ancient Rift Valley, small bands of Homo sapiens move between riverbanks and rocky slopes. They are the only surviving branch of their kind in this place. Yet they do not know how close their existence has come to ending. The genetic record, hidden deep in the cells of their descendants, will one day tell the story not long before. Their numbers may have been reduced to just a few thousand, a near-extinction event caused by a changing climate. Evidence comes from layers of volcanic ash, from ancient shorelines, from DNA fragments carried in modern people. Somewhere around 70,000 years ago, the planet cooled suddenly. Glaciers in the north expanded. Rains failed in much of Africa. Lakes shrank. Grasslands turned to dust. Herds of antelope and buffalo moved away or died out. The people here adapted in quiet, patient ways. They sought water where it still flowed in the shadowed channels of seasonal streams, in springs hidden between boulders. They ate what the land would give roots, small game, the occasional shellfish from the far-off coast. Every tool was shaped from stone found nearby. Some of these stones, chipped into points and blades, will survive in the ground for tens of thousands of years, waiting to be found. A single shell bead, pierced and smoothed by human hands, has been found more than 100 kilometers from the sea. It speaks of journeys, perhaps trade, perhaps the slow wandering of entire families over years. Its presence hints at a network of contact, fragile but real, between scattered group. Such connections may have helped these people endure when the world seemed to close in. And still, mysteries remain. Why did our species survive here, when other early human groups elsewhere vanished? Was it a matter of luck, the right plants, the right animals, the right shelter at the right time? Or was there something in their way of sharing resources, of maintaining ties across the dry lands, that gave them an advantage? Archaeology offers clues, but not certainty. At the same time, far beyond the horizon, planetary forces shaped every choice these humans could make. The tilt of Earth's axis, the slow change of its orbit, the great ocean currents shifting with the winds, all conspired to make rain patterns unpredictable, to shorten the growing seasons. When glaciers lock away water in the high latitudes, the sea level drops. Coastlines stretch outward, exposing wide plains where fish and shellfish may be found. But these new lands are still far from the Rift Valley, and the journey to them would be long. Step by step, the groups here learned the rhythm of survival. They followed migrating animals during the brief wet season. They stored food in whatever ways they knew, drying strips of meat, keeping nuts in woven baskets. Children learned to read the landscape by watching the elders. They noticed which shrubs kept their leaves longest, which birds' calls meant rain was near. Night after night, they looked up at the same stars we see now. Perhaps they told stories to explain them. We do not know their words. We can only imagine their view, a sky untouched by city lights. The Milky Way, a river of pale fire, flowing from one horizon to the other. From these highlands, some will one day set out on a path that changes everything. But for now, they remain here, gathered around small fires, waiting for the rains to return. The dry season deepens. Rivers that once flowed wide and steady are now narrow threads of water. elephants, their hides coated in dust, walk long distances between shrinking waterholes. The people follow, but at a careful distance, for these great animals are dangerous if startled. Far to the north, the Sahara is an expanse of sand and stone. It is larger now than in wetter centuries. What was once a green, lake-filled plain has become a barrier few can cross. Yet at certain times, when the planet's orbit tilts the rains northward, this desert blooms, shallow lakes return, grasses spread, and in those brief, wet centuries, humans may pass through. Archaeologists find hints of such windows in time tools buried beneath ancient lake beds, fish bones in places now hundreds of kilometers from the nearest river. These clues suggest that our ancestors, when conditions allowed, moved northward in small groups. But the evidence is scattered. Much of it lies buried beneath shifting dunes or lost to erosion. One enduring mystery is whether these early journeys out of East Africa were deliberate explorations, or simply the slow drift of families following game and water. Some researchers argue for intention that these were the first steps of a planned migration. Others see no single moment of departure, only a gradual widening of territory over generations. The planet, meanwhile, keeps shifting under their feet. In the far north, ice sheets push southward, locking up vast amounts of water. The oceans fall by tens of meters. Across the Red Sea, what is now a narrow strait becomes even narrower, with islands and reefs exposed at low tide. It is possible, though not proven, that humans could cross here in small boats or by wading between sandbars. On the African side of this sea, the land changes with every kilometre. The Rift Valley's cliffs give way to coastal plains. Mangroves cluster in tidal creeks, their roots sheltering crabs and fish. Farther inland, dry savannas stretch toward the horizon, dotted with acacia trees whose umbrella-shaped crowns mark the distance. For those who reach the coast, the sea is a new source of food. Shellfish, easily gathered at low tide, provide rich protein. Fish can be caught in tidal pools. Even seabirds, nesting in dense colonies, can be taken when other food is scarce. Such coastal foraging may have been one key to survival during the harshest droughts. Among the most intriguing finds are obsidian blades, traced through chemical analysis to volcanic sources hundreds of kilometers away. These tools tell of travel and exchange and of knowledge passed from one group to another. They may also hint at routes that skirted the edges of the desert, connecting far-flung communities. Still, life is never easy. Inland, the dry season can last many months. Fires burn in the grasslands, set by lightning or by people to drive game. Waterholes become crowded, not just with wildlife, but with predators, lion, hyena, and crocodiles. Humans must choose their campsites with care, staying close enough to resources, but far enough from danger. Step by step, they refine their tools. Stone points are hafted onto wooden shafts with plant resins. Hearths are lined with stones to hold heat through the night. Some sites even show patterns of post holes, perhaps the remains of windbreaks or temporary shelters. Though these structures leave little trace, they speak of planning, of shaping the landscape to meet human needs. At night, the air cools quickly. Fires are fed with branches gathered during the day. The smell of smoke keeps insects away. Children sleep close to their parents. The stars turn slowly overhead, the same constellations rising and setting with the seasons. From these coasts and valley, the path outward will eventually lead into Arabia. and beyond. But the timing is uncertain. Genetic evidence suggests multiple small movements, separated by centuries, perhaps even millennia. Some will succeed, establishing themselves in new lands. Others will vanish, leaving no trace but a scatter of tools. For now, the people here remain on the edge of two worlds, the inland savannas they know well, and the coastal margins that open toward the unknown. When the climate allows, they may push farther. When it turns against them, they will retreat. And always, they will watch the sky, the wind, the water, for signs of change. The coastline curves eastward. Here, the land narrows toward the Horn of Africa. The Red Sea lies beyond a ribbon of shifting blues and silvers beneath the sun. To those who stand on the shore, the far side is visible on a clear day. It is a tempting sight and a silent challenge. Tens of thousands of years later, geologists will study the seabed here. They will find evidence of lower sea levels, of exposed islands, of tidal flats once wide enough to walk across at certain times of year. But the people who lived here did not measure depth in meters. They judged the water by the strength of the current, by the taste of the wind, by the behavior of seabirds. Some researchers believe that during one of the glacial low stands, humans made the crossing to Arabia, whether they used simple rafts, dug-out canoes, or timed their steps between tidal shallows. No one can say. The archaeological record on both sides is sparse. What survives are hints a flake of stone here, a hearth there that suggests human presence but not the full story. On the African side, camps cluster near freshwater springs that bubble up just inland from the shore. Here, palms grow thick, their fronds rustling in the breeze. Salt-tolerant shrubs line the tidal creeks. Shell-middens, piles of discarded oyster, and clam shells mark places where people returned season after season. These coastal foragers knew the rhythms of the sea. They would have noticed when fish shoals moved close to shore. They would have timed their gathering to the lowest tides, when rocks and reefs lay bare, rich with mussels, crabs, and seaweed. Such skills required observation and a memory carried from one generation to the next. Farther inland, the terrain rises into dry hills. Acacia trees scatter across the slopes, their bark scarred where people stripped it for fibers or resin. Stone outcrops offer raw material for tools. Some of these stones, struck with precision, form long, slender points, a style that appears in both East Africa and parts of Arabia. The similarity raises questions. Did the style spread with the people who crossed, or did separate group, facing similar needs, invent it independently? Beyond the hills lies a different world. The Arabian Peninsula, at times, holds rivers and grasslands during wetter phases of the climate cycle. At other times, it is an arid plateau, cut by deep wadis that carry water only after rare storms. Satellite imagery today reveals ancient lake beds and river channels now buried under sand. These features suggest that early humans could have found habitable corridors through what is now desert. The crossing, if it happened in this era, would have been more than a physical step. It would have opened a vast new continent for exploration. From Arabia, routes lead north into the Levant, east into Persia, and beyond into Central and South Asia. Yet the first arrivals would not have known this. They would have seen only what lay a few days' walk ahead, a valley, a stand of trees, a distant ridge. The climate's grip remained tight. Even in coastal areas, Drought could shrink springs and turn fertile ground to dust. Groups may have split, some staying by the shore, others pushing inland in search of game. Such dispersals carried risk. If a new area failed to provide food and water, returning to familiar ground might be impossible. One fragment of obsidian, found far inland in Arabia, has been traced to a volcanic source in East Africa. It is a silent link between the continents, carried perhaps in a hunter's pouch, traded from hand to hand, or passed down through generations before being lost. It tells us that contact, direct or indirect, once crossed the water. The planetary view reminds us of scale. Around this time, ice sheets cover much of northern Europe and Canada. In the tropics, belts of monsoon rain shift back and forth over centuries. Sea levels stand far lower than today, redrawing the map of coasts and islands. Human movements, though small in number, trace the edges of these great changes. At night, on the African shore, the sea reflects the moonlight in shifting patterns. The wind carries the smell of salt and the calls of distant seabirds. Fires burn low as people rest after the day's work. Perhaps someone looks across the water, wondering what lies beyond and whether the next season's tides will carry them there. In the cool light before dawn, the inland hills hold their shadows. Here, water gathers in shallow basins after rare rains. For weeks or months, these pools draw life antelope, gazelle, and sometimes even wild cattle. Humans arrive in their turn, setting temporary camps nearby. This is the southern edge of the Arabian Peninsula. It is a land of contrasts: coastal plains, high mountains, and interior deserts. The mountains catch the moisture from seasonal winds, feeding narrow streams that cut through the rock. In the valleys below, acacia and tamarisk trees provide shade. Birds nest in their branches. Small game hides in the undergrowth. Archaeological sites here show signs of repeated use. Stone flakes and cores lie scattered on the ground, weathered but still sharp to the touch. Some points match styles found in East Africa. Others are unique to this region, shaped by local stone and local needs. Such variety suggests adaptation, the blending of old knowledge with new materials. Not far from these camps, ancient lake beds stretch wide and flat. Satellite images reveal their outlines, even when no water has filled them for tens of thousands of years. In wetter times, these lakes would have been magnets for people and animals alike. Fish bones found in the sediment tell of meals taken long ago. Some sites even preserve the footprints of humans and wildlife, pressed into mud that later hardened into stone. These traces raise questions about the timing of human presence here. Were these lakes full during the first expansions out of Africa? Or did people arrive later, during another wet phase? The evidence is patchy. Erosion and shifting sands erase much of the record. Farther inland, the desert dominates. Rolling dunes march toward the horizon, their crests shifting with the wind. Travel here is difficult. Without reliable water, any journey must be planned with care. Nomadic routes follow the path of seasonal pastures, where grazing animals can survive for a time. And yet, humans persist. They dig shallow wells in dry riverbeds. They follow migrating herds, taking what game they can with stone-tipped spears, plant foods, seeds, roots, and the occasional fruit fill out their diet. Fire remains a constant companion, used for cooking, warmth, and keeping predators at bay. One lesser-known detail comes from a cave in the highlands here. Archaeologists have found stone tools alongside the bones of both land animals and fish. This mix suggests a flexible way of life moving between inland and coastal zones as resources shifted. It also hints at a wide knowledge of the land, passed between generations over centuries. The planetary forces at work remain vast and impersonal. Glacial ice in the north reflects sunlight back into space, keeping the global climate cooler. Rain belts shift south and north in long cycles, opening and closing migration corridors. As sea levels stay low, the outlines of Arabia, Africa, and Asia are subtly different from today. Islands dot the coasts, some close enough to visit without losing sight of land. At night, in the mountain valleys, the air is cooler than by the sea. Fires burn within circles of stones, their light flickering against the rock walls. The sound of water trickling in a nearby stream blends with the calls of night birds. Above, the stars are sharp and bright in the dry air. Each dawn, the first light creeps down the slopes, warming the camps before the heat of the day returns. From these highlands, paths lead north into the heart of the peninsula, and eventually toward lands beyond. For now, the people who live here move with the seasons, reading the land in ways that leave little mark, but in scattered places, their tools and footprints remain silent witnesses to journeys that stretched across continents. The land tilts eastward. From the high plateaus of southern Arabia, dry valleys descend toward a warmer sea. Salt flats shimmer. Mangrove-lined creeks braid the coast. Beyond them, the Arabian Sea breathes in long, patient swells. Here, the winds change with the seasons. They arrive from the ocean in great, steady currents. Clouds gather over warm water, then climb the heights and break. In wet years, hillsides green for a while. In dry years, the wind carries only dust. People learn these rhythms. They move when the first distant thunder hints at rain. They linger on shorelines when the land is bare. The sea gives food even in lean months. Tidal pools trap fish. Shellfish cling to rocks. Seaweed dries well and keeps. Stone tools lie where camps once stood above the high tide line. Some are long and slender, carefully shaped. Others are small flakes, quick and practical, struck off in moments of need. A few pieces show polish from use on plant fibers or wood. Such marks speak of rope making, of hafts repaired and nets mended beside the water. Farther along the coast, headlands give way to long beaches and low cliffs, and the journey is not a straight line. It bends around inlets. It pauses at freshwater seeps. It climbs and descends where rocky spurs meet the sea. Step by step, the shoreline becomes a path not marked on any map, yet learned by memory. Across the eastern horizon lies a narrow strait and, beyond it, new coasts. At certain times, the sea sits lower than it does today. Islands rise from the shallows. Sandbars appear at extreme low tides. The distance between lands seems shorter, though still ruled by currents and weather. One day, much later, geographers will reconstruct this world. They will show that the basin now filled by the Gulf was once a broad river plain, a single great river fed by many tributaries, wound through reed beds and lakes before meeting the sea. The oasis of that drowned landscape may have sheltered herds, birds, and people through long dry spells. Whether our species lived there in numbers remains uncertain. The sediments are hidden beneath water, and modern shorelines. Among the lesser-known traces are beads made from small shells drilled with care. Some lie far from any modern beach. They suggest journeys inland from the coast or exchanges between groups who moved in different seasons. The holes are regular, as if made with practiced hands using the same technique over many generations. Such tiny objects carry large meanings, social ties, shared knowledge, and a sense of belonging that reaches beyond a single camp. A planetary story is never far away. To the north, ice sheets brighten the world and cool the air. Monsoon belts shift with slow variations in Earth's orbit. Sometimes the rains push farther west, sometimes they retreat, leaving the coast as the only reliable granary. With every swing, migration corridors open and then close again. On a high bluff above the waves, people watch the sea. They study the line where wind and water meet. They learn when the swell will be gentle, when a crossing to the next headland will be safe. If boats exist, they are simple logs bound together, rafts of reeds or hollowed trunks. If not, people still move between coves at the calmest hours, using floats of driftwood and bundles of dried reeds for support. No blueprint survives. Only the scattered evidence of presence returns their choices to us. There is a memory in the ash of distant mountains. Far to the east, a volcano once darkened the sky. Its ash fell over wide lands. In some places, stone tools appear both below and above the ash layers, suggesting that people endured. Yet the debate continues. Did this eruption cause a true bottleneck in our species, or did humans, living in many refuges, pass through the event with resilience shaped by coastal foraging and flexible movement? The answer remains unsettled. The shoreline teaches patience. Tides set the tempo of work. At the lowest ebb, a reef becomes a harvest ground. At the highest flood, waves press close and demand caution. Children learn to read the ripple of water over rocks. They learn which shells are safe and which sting. They carry this knowledge with them when the group moves on. Inland routes still matter. Wadis hold water after rare storms. Acacia groves offer shade and gum. Tracks of gazelle cross the sand and point toward grazing. Groups split and reunite with the seasons. If game scatters, the sea remains a fallback, a long larder that runs parallel to the land. A single, quiet fact endures through many sites. Fireplaces are small and repeated. Charcoal lies in thin lenses, heated stones crack and redden. These modest hearths show continuity of habit, careful fuel use in places where trees are few, flame shielded from wind, embers kept for morning. It is a practical wisdom for a sparse landscape. The unresolved questions gather like haze on a hot day. Were these coastal paths true highways of expansion, or were they seasonal loops that held people close to home, generation after generation? With only occasional leaps beyond, did inland rains and green windows pull bands away from the sea for centuries at a time? Or did they always return to the shore when drought returned? Each answer shifts the map of how and when our species reached new shores. Look outward again. When ice locks water in the far north, the world's coastlines lengthen by many kilometers. Estuaries become broad mudflats. River mouths move outward, dragging their deltas into the newly exposed plains. Bird migrations redirect along these newborn edges, and humans read those lines as guides. A journey along such a coast could cover the length of a modern continent in a lifetime, if taken in many careful stages. Night falls with a slow, cooling wind. Fires flicker behind low stone walls built to break the breeze. The tide turns under the stars. Somewhere in the dark, a fish leaps and falls back with a hollow sound. In the morning, footprints will press into wet sand and point east. Another cove waits, another headland, another season's chance. The coast bends south and east, where the Arabian Sea meets the mouth of a vast, drowned plain. Here, the shoreline is not fixed. It shifts with the tide, with the wind, and with the slow rise and fall of the world's oceans. Tens of thousands of years ago, this was no gulf. It was a fertile basin, watered by rivers that joined into a broad channel before spilling into the sea. Along its banks, reeds grew tall. Fish swam in quiet backwaters. Flocks of waterbirds fed in the shallows. If people walked here, they would have found fresh water in many places. The soil would have been rich, easy to dig for roots. Game would have come to drink, leaving clear tracks. But now, the whole plain lies beneath water, its evidence sealed in mud. Archaeologists cannot yet reach most of it, and they work instead along the margins, the present-day coasts of Iran, Oman, and the southern Gulf. Here, they find stone tools in terraces above ancient beaches, and shell middens tucked into caves that look out to the sea. Some of these sites are more than 60,000 years old. The people who left them may have been among the first to move steadily eastward along this ocean's edge. Season after season, they learned the local cycles. The summer monsoon brought strong winds and high waves, making boat travel risky. In winter, calmer seas allowed longer trips between headlands and islands. Fishing, gathering, and hunting shifted with these patterns. One lesser-known find comes from a coastal cave where ash and charcoal lie in distinct layers between thick deposits of shells. This suggests repeated visits perhaps each year, when certain shellfish were at their best. Such a pattern shows deep familiarity with place. The people did not simply pass through, they returned, knowing exactly when the shore would be richest. Farther inland, dry plains stretched toward the horizon. These lands receive little rain, but seasonal rivers, wadis, still carve channels through the rock. When storms strike far upstream, flash floods rush through these wadis, leaving pools that can last for weeks. Tracks of gazelle, ibex, and even ostrich lead to these temporary oases. Humans follow, hunting, gathering plants, and filling skins with water for the journey back to the coast. The unresolved mysteries of this stage lie in the connections. Were the coastal and inland groups the same people, moving between zones, or were they distinct communities, trading and visiting, but living apart? If contact was regular, it might explain the wide spread of certain tool styles. If it was rare, then each group must have developed its own survival strategies. Planetary forces still frame every choice. To the north, ice sheets hold vast stores of water. To the south, the Indian Ocean warms and cools with slow shifts in wind and current. Each change in sea temperature alters the timing of monsoons, the abundance of fish, and the patterns of rain far inland. Such shifts can open a path one century and close it the next. Somewhere in this period, humans cross into the lands that will one day be called South Asia. The exact route remains unknown. It may have been a steady walk along beaches and mangroves. It may have included crossings from island to island in the exposed shallows of a lowered sea. Either way, the step is significant. It marks the first confirmed presence of our species far beyond Africa and Arabia. On the shores of what is now India's western coast, stone tools lie beside the remains of ancient shell heaps. In some sites, the stone is local. In others, it has been carried from far away, suggesting movement or exchange. This echoes the pattern seen in Africa, the blending of local adaptation with distant knowledge. A fact of scale gives perspective. From the southern tip of Arabia to the Indus Plain is a journey longer than the distance from Lisbon to Moscow. Yet over generations, such a path could be traced without any map, guided by the repetition of coastal landmarks and the constancy of the sea. At night, the surf rolls in and out with a deep, steady rhythm. Fires glow at the back of sheltered coves. Smoke rises into the still air, carrying the scent of roasting fish. The people here may not think of themselves as travelers. To them, the shore is simply the world, a ribbon of food, water, and shelter that winds endlessly on. Some will turn inland, following rivers toward grasslands and mountains. Others will keep to the water's edge, where the horizon promises another headland, another bay. In both directions, the journey continues. The western coast of South Asia stretches in long, gentle arcs. Low headlands alternate with tidal flats and mangrove creeks. The Arabian Sea breathes in and out, steady as a sleeping animal. Along this edge, people continue their slow movement, measuring distance not by numbers but by coves, freshwater seeps, and the day's light. Rivers come down from basalt highlands to meet the sea. Their mouths shift with storms and seasons, opening new channels, closing others with sand. When the monsoon returns, brown water spreads into deltas and carries driftwood out to sea. When the rains fail, channels narrow to threads and salt works inland on the roots of reeds. Here, the stone underfoot is often volcanic. Dark flows of ancient lava form stair-stepped plateaus, the Deccan Traps. On their edges, people find good raw material for tools. Cores split cleanly. Long flakes and points can be struck with practiced blows. The shapes recall older traditions from the West, yet they begin to vary with local stone and local tasks. Archaeologists will later read these variations as signatures of time and place. On some terraces above the modern shoreline, scatters of artifacts lie near old beach ridges. Elsewhere, tools rest in the silts of former channels, now far inland. Together, these finds suggest a flexible life focused on water and season, the kind of pattern that carries small bands across large maps without grand designs. Inland, broad rivers, the Narmada, the Tapi, the Godavari, cut corridors through hills and dry forest. Their banks hold pools through dry months. Grass grows on their floodplains after brief showers. People follow these green threads, hunting small game, gathering tubers, and hammering plant fibers into cord. Where basalt gives way to sandstone, shelters open under cliff edges, dry even in hard rain. Fire reddens the rock in long, thin stains. A lesser-known detail rests in a layer of ash and stone. At several sites on the subcontinent, including a plateau of wind-smoothed rock, tool-bearing horizons appear both beneath and above a thin sheet of volcanic ash. This ash, blown far across the Indian Ocean from a mountain to the east, marks a singular moment in deep time. The continuity of tools around it hints that people endured before and after the fall, adapting to its short-term effects without vanishing from the land. The detail is quiet but telling persistence wrapped in geology. Mysteries remain. Did the first arrivals here hug the coast for generations before turning inland in strength, or did multiple groups enter by different doors, some along beaches, others up river valleys from the start? The record is incomplete. Erosion reworks floodplains. Roots disturb older horizons. What survives is a patchwork of campsites, quarry spots, and hearth flecks that refuse a single, simple story. The planetary frame continues to set the stage. Far to the north, ice holds oceans low, drawing shorelines outward and revealing broad continental shelves. Over South Asia, the summer monsoon pulses with orbital cycles, strengthening in some centuries, weakening in others. When the monsoon is vigorous, forests spread and rivers run strong. When it wanes, scrub and grass reclaim the plains, and lakes withdraw into salt-rimmed bowls. Each swing reshapes routes and choices, often on scales longer than a human life, yet near enough to be felt in the memory of a place. On the Deccan's western scarp, the land tilts down toward the sea. Trails creep along ridgelines and drop into valleys where permanent springs bubble from joints in the basalt. In these pockets, edible lilies root in shallow pools. Wild figs ripen in staggered seasons. Stonefish traps, simple V-shaped rows of rock, can be rebuilt year after year on small streams as water falls. None of this is dramatic. All of it is sufficient. The toolkits quietly shift. Still dominated by Middle Paleolithic traditions, they begin to show smaller flakes and careful retouch in some regions. Later, many thousands of years on, true microliths, tiny blades mounted in sets, will bloom across the subcontinent. But in this earlier horizon, the emphasis remains on long flakes, points, and scrapers, well suited to cutting plant stems, working hides, and shaping wooden shafts. In the interior, an expanse of sandy scrub forms the thar. Dunes rise and fall, held in place by grasses during wetter centuries, set loose by wind during dry spells. Ancient lake basins pockmark its surface. When filled, they draw birds and ungulates, and people gather on their margins to cook small fish and collect seeds. When empty, the basins still hold moisture a little deeper down, detectable by the green of shrubs and by the path of animal tracks. One quiet find, far from any living coastline, is a cluster of beads made from ostrich eggshell. They are drilled with care and polished by wear. Their presence speaks to the reach of materials and ideas, the eggshells of a grassland bird worked into ornaments and carried or exchanged between groups. The beads do not tell us the words spoken when they changed hands. They do tell us that symbolism and social bonds traveled alongside food and water. The question of encounter hovers at the margins. Far to the northwest, other human lineages inhabit cooler valleys and rock shelters. In high passes and river corridors, genes and tools will one day hint at contact brief, complex, and uneven across space. But here, in the western and central parts of the subcontinent, the evidence is still muted. Whether any meetings occurred in this time and place remains unproven, shaped more by genetics, read in the present, than by artifacts recovered in the ground. Scale helps to ground the map. From the Indus Plain in the northwest, the low hills above the Bay of Bengal spans a distance greater than Paris to Kiev. Yet each day's walk is small, bounded by access to water and the need to return to a known shelter before darkness. Over generations, these modest radii stitched together into migrations that redraw continents without any single dramatic march. The sea continues to offer its steady reserve. When inland pools fail, groups return to tidal flats where fish and shellfish can be taken at low water. Children learn to watch the gulls, the way they circle dense shoals near shore. They learn the timing of spring tides that expose the broadest reefs. They learn Easter too, the warnings of weather, a sudden line on the horizon, a different pitch in the surf. The smell of rain, long before drops, touch the sand. Fires anchor each evening. Embers are carried from camp to camp in dry husks to save effort in places where good fuel is scarce. Hearths are small and neat, their stones darkened by repeated heat. At dawn, ash is blown aside, and the day begins again, measured by the work of gathering, the search for water, and the slow walk to the next known point on the land. Across these coasts and interiors, a pattern takes shape, persistence through variety. No single environment defines life here. Instead, a mosaic of beaches, river corridors, lake basins, and rock shelters forms an interconnected set of options. When one piece fails in a dry swing of climate, another remains available. This, as much as any specific tool, is the technology that carries people forward, a mental map of refuges and routes, tested and retested, season after season. Night brings quiet. The wind drops on the plateau. Stars harden in the dry air, bright enough to throw faint shadows on pale rock. Somewhere, far to the east, the land narrows again toward another sea and another chain of islands. The road does not end, it only bends. In the morning, the first steps point that way. The eastern edge of the subcontinent narrows toward a wide delta. Here, great rivers spill their silt into the Bay of Bengal, braiding channels that shift with each flood season. In the dry months, sandbars emerge, white under the sun. In the wet, the channels swell, carrying logs and debris out to sea. Mangroves anchor the shoreline where fresh and salt water mix. Their roots tangle into dark passageways, sheltering crabs and small fish. The air smells of mud and salt. For people moving along the coast, these thickets are both resource and obstacle. They provide food, fuel wood, and shelter from wind, yet they also hide crocodiles and block easy landing from boats or rafts. Archaeological traces here are scarce. The river's shifting course buries old camps deep under silt or washes them away entirely. What remains comes mostly from higher ground, sandy ridges and rocky headlands that stand above the flood. On these points, stone flakes and cores lie scattered among fragments of shell, marking places where people paused between journeys. Inland, the forests grow dense in wetter centuries. Tall sal trees shade the undergrowth. Monkeys and deer move in their branches and clearings. In drier centuries, these same plains open into grassland, scattered with thorny shrubs. Each shift changes the pattern of life, the routes taken, the foods gathered, the places where camps can stand. One lesser-known find comes from a cave high in the hills that fringe the eastern plains. Within its mouth, archaeologists have uncovered a thin layer of ochre-stained earth, along with flaked stone and animal bones. The ochre may have been used to mark tools, bodies, or shelters. Though its purpose is unknown, its presence suggests symbolic behavior, carried here from older traditions or invented anew. The questions of contact sharpen in this region. To the north and east lie lands where other human lineages may still dwell in this time, though the record is fragmentary. Were there meetings along river corridors, exchanges of tools or mates, or did dense forests and seasonal floods keep populations apart? Genetic evidence hints at complex histories, but the direct archaeological proof is elusive. From a planetary view, the stage continues to shift. Sea levels remain low, exposing wide coastal shelves. Offshore islands are closer to the mainland than they will be for tens of thousands of years. Inland? The monsoon's strength waxes and wanes with slow changes in the planet's orbit, drawing the green belt northward in some centuries and pushing it south in others. When the rains fail, rivers shrink to narrow channels. When they surge, they reshape the land entirely. Moving east along the coast, the terrain changes again. The shoreline becomes straighter, with fewer deep bays. Here, sandy beaches stretch for kilometers, backed by dunes and low scrub. Fresh water comes from scattered ponds and seasonal streams. Travel between safe water sources requires planning, but the land is easier to walk than the tangled mangroves to the west. Fishing remains a steady anchor. At low tide, people gather shellfish and set small traps for fish in the shallows. They may use simple nets woven from plant fibers, anchored with stones. Driftwood provides frames for drying the catch. Fires burn on the leeward side of dunes, where smoke can rise without scattering embers into the dry grass. The movement inland is shaped by rivers that cut deep channels into the plateau beyond. These rivers offer routes toward the hill country and, eventually, toward the highlands of Southeast Asia. Whether early humans followed them in this era remains uncertain. The dense vegetation in wetter centuries may have slowed entry, while drier centuries could have opened more navigable paths. Scale offers perspective here. From the western delta to the first mountain ridges of the east spans a distance similar to walking from Rome to Warsaw. Yet this journey could unfold over many generations, with each group moving only as far as its memory and resources allowed. No single expedition would have known the whole route, but the accumulated steps of countless families could still carry the species onward. Another quiet fact emerges from shell beads found far inland. Their type matches those from coastal sites many days' walk away. Such finds suggest either seasonal migrations between coast and interior, or the existence of exchange networks that carried small, valued items across ecological zones. In both cases, the implication is the same information, materials, and perhaps stories moved with the people. As the low sun warms the beaches, the air smells of salt and drying seaweed. Waves break in a steady rhythm. Children wade in the shallows, turning over stones for crabs. Adults mend nets, sharpen tools, and prepare food for the evening meal. Inland, smoke from other fires rises in the still air, signals not of deliberate communication, but of parallel lives unfolding across the land. When night comes, the surf is loud enough to mask distant sounds. Fires burn low to conserve fuel. Stars reflect faintly on wet sand, marking the edge between land and sea. Beyond that edge lie more coasts, more rivers, more possibilities. The path ahead will bend toward the islands and peninsulas of a new region, shaped by tides and monsoon winds. Far to the east, the continent breaks apart into peninsulas and scattered islands. Here, the Bay of Bengal gives way to narrow straits and wide estuaries, where rivers pour into the sea through labyrinths of channels. The air is warm and heavy, thick with the smell of salt, mud, and flowering trees. This is the threshold of Southeast Asia. In this time, with the seas low, the map is different. Broad shelves link many of the islands to the mainland. Mangrove swamps fringe the coasts, while farther inland, Rainforest stretches unbroken for hundreds of kilometers. The canopy hums with insects and the calls of birds and primates. The people arriving here bring skills shaped by many coasts behind them. They know how to read the tides, how to find water where the land is flat, how to keep fire in damp conditions. But the forest presents new challenges. It is dense, dim under the leaves, and alive with unfamiliar plants and animals. One lesser-known clue to these first arrivals comes from river terraces in what is now Myanmar. Here, archaeologists have found stone tools in association with animal remains typical of tropical forest edges, deer, wild cattle, and freshwater fish. The tools are not identical to those of India, but they share enough traits to suggest a link, perhaps carried eastward by migrating groups. The unresolved questions are many. Did these early humans skirt the forest by following beaches and river mouths, avoiding the deep interior, or did they push into the green world, adapting to its resources as they went? Dense vegetation and acidic soils erase many traces. Organic tools, if used, have long since decayed. From a planetary perspective, this region is part of a larger stage. The lowered sea level exposes the Sunda Shelf, joining present-day Sumatra, Java, and Borneo to the mainland in a single, vast peninsula. To the south and east lies Sahul, the joined landmass of Australia, and New Guinea, still separated by stretches of open water, but closer now than in any later age. This geography offers pathways unlike any in today's world, corridors of dry land between seas and rivers that shape the direction of movement. Travel along the coasts here is both opportunity and risk. The tidal range is great in some places, flooding wide flats at high water and leaving them bare and glistening at low. Estuaries can be rich in fish and shellfish, yet they can also be home to crocodiles. Mangrove channels twist unpredictably, and sudden storms can sweep in from the sea with little warning. Inland, river valleys open briefly into floodplains before narrowing again into gorges. During the monsoon, these valleys can flood swiftly, cutting off movement. During the dry months, they offer green corridors through the forest, with water still flowing in their deeper pools. A quiet but telling find comes from a limestone cave near the coast. Within its chambers, researchers have uncovered a mix of marine shells and animal bones, layered with charcoal and stone flakes. This suggests that the cave served as a base where inland and coastal foods were both used, a sign of mobility between zones. Tool traditions here begin to diverge from those of the West. While large flakes and points remain common, there is increasing use of smaller, more carefully shaped pieces. These may have been hafted into composite tools, though direct evidence is rare or used for tasks requiring finer cutting edges. The scale of movement in this landscape can be measured in days between rivers, in weeks between major estuaries, over generations. These steps accumulate into a steady eastward drift. The path may split some groups turning south toward the long spine of Sumatra and the Java plains, others moving east toward the narrow isthmus that leads deeper into the mainland. Each choice is shaped by climate. When the monsoon is strong, rivers run full and the forest edge creeps farther from the sea. When it weakens, coastal flats expand and travel along the shore becomes easier. These shifts, unfolding over centuries, can redirect the flow of people without any single moment of decision. From the high mouth of a limestone cave, the view reaches over a canopy broken only by the silver thread of a river and the distant glint of the sea. Fires burn in the hollow, their smoke drifting upward and out. Voices carry softly in the still, humid air. Somewhere beyond the horizon, unseen, lies the next coast, the next headland, the next crossing. Night in the tropics is different from the dry lands behind. It comes swiftly. Without the long twilight of high plains, the forest darkens in minutes and the sounds shift. Birds quiet, insects and frogs take over. The rustle of leaves signals something moving unseen. In this deep green world, firelight becomes the center of all things. From here, the way forward will branch again toward the southern peninsula that now links to Sumatra, toward the inland routes that lead to upland valleys, and toward the far eastern islands where the next great water crossing awaits. Each branch will demand new knowledge, but the thread of survival remains the same: move with the seasons, carry the memory of resources, adapt to each shift in land and sea. The southern peninsula of Southeast Asia narrows into a long, forested finger of land. Today it is called the Malay Peninsula, but in this age it is not truly a peninsula at all. To the west, the coastline runs unbroken to Sumatra. To the east, shallow seas and exposed plains link it to what is now Borneo. Only to the south does the land finally end in water. The air is warm and wet for much of the year. Rain comes in heavy bursts, drumming on leaves and pooling in hollows of tree roots. When the monsoon winds shift, the rains slow, the air grows heavy, and the rivers run lower. For people moving here, the forest canopy offers both shelter and challenge. It shields from the midday sun and heavy downpours, but it also hides landmarks and muffles sound. Navigation depends on rivers, ridges, and the steady position of the sun and stars. Along the coasts, mangroves and mudflats alternate with sandy bays. In these calmer waters, fish and shellfish are abundant. Nets woven from plant fibers can be set in tidal channels. Basket traps catch crabs and shrimp. Smoke from drying racks drifts inland on humid air. Inland, trails follow rivers that wind through dense rainforest. Large trees dominate, their roots like walls around the trunks. Ferns, vines, and orchids crowd the spaces between. Clearings are rare and often formed by fallen giants, where sunlight suddenly reaches the forest floor. A lesser-known detail lies in the caves of limestone hills that rise unexpectedly from the lowlands. Here, archaeologists have found layers of occupation stretching across many centuries. Stone tools are joined by remains of freshwater mollusks, fruit bats, small deer. In some layers, tiny marine shells appear carried inland from the coast, perhaps as ornaments or as part of stored food. The unanswered questions here revolve around movement and connection. Did people settle for long periods in these fertile, resource-rich zones, or did they continue a rhythm of seasonal movement between coast and interior, between river valleys and uplands? The distribution of artifacts hints at both, with some sites showing long continuity and others suggesting brief, repeated visits. From a planetary view, this is a time when ice still grips the far north, holding sea levels far below their modern line. The shallow seas on either side of this land are broad grasslands and wetlands, threaded with rivers. Herds of grazing animals wander there, along with predators and perhaps people. These plains form natural bridges between what we now see as islands, turning the region into a vast, interconnected habitat. Travel across such land is easier than through the thickest forest. Trails follow game tracks way, avoiding the densest vegetation. Water is plentiful in streams and ponds, though always tested before drinking. The openness allows for longer sight lines, a relief after days in the dim green corridors of the rainforest. Tool traditions adapt subtly to the changing environments. Large cutting flakes remain common, but there is growing use of smaller, more precise pieces, possibly hafted into bamboo or wooden handles. Bamboo itself, abundant here, may have been an important raw material used for spears, containers, and even simple rafts, though it leaves no trace after so many millennia. One quiet fact is the presence of obsidian in a few sites far from any volcanic source. This black volcanic glass must have travelled by hand across long distances, perhaps exchanged between groups over many generations. It is a sign that even in the most forested zones, networks of movement and contact extended far beyond the range of a single family band. The southern tip of this land is a turning point. From here, routes lead west to Sumatra, south to Java, or east toward the plains that now connect to Borneo. The choice of path may depend on season, resource availability, or simple chance. A storm at the wrong time, a failure of food in one direction, might send a group on a different route entirely, a choice that could, over centuries, alter the human map of the region. Evening comes quickly in the tropics. Shadows lengthen under the trees. The air cools slightly, though humidity remains. Fires burn in small clearings, their light flickering against tree trunks and leaves. The smell of cooking mingles with the scent of damp earth and flowering plants. Somewhere in the darkness beyond, the sound of waves on a distant shore marks the edge of the land. Beyond that edge lies the next stage of the journey, the crossing to Sahul, a step unlike any before, across water that cannot be walked, no matter how low the seas may fall. The southern horizon opens wide to water. Here, at the edge of the great Sunda Shelf, the land finally stops. Beyond lies a chain of islands, stepping stones across a sea that never fully dries, even when the ice in the far north locks away so much of the world's water. These are the islands of Wallacea. They are separated from both Asia and Australia by deep channels, lines drawn by ocean currents as much as by distance. Even at the lowest sea levels, crossing them requires deliberate movement over open water. The coasts of the nearest islands are green and steep. Rain falls often, feeding waterfalls that tumble into the sea. Coral reefs ring many shores, their bright shallows rich in fish, shellfish, and sea turtles. Mangroves fill the mouths of rivers, while the high slopes hold dense tropical forests. For the first people to reach here, the crossing would have been both a risk and an opportunity. The distances between some islands are short, visible from one shore to the next, but the channels are swift. A wrong tide or sudden squall could sweep a raft far from its target. One lesser-known clue to these early voyages lies in the stone tools of Flores and other islands. Some are clearly made from rock not found locally, implying either movement between islands or the transport of materials from the mainland before departure. On Flores, there is also a much older record tools made by another human lineage long before Homo sapiens arrived. Whether the newcomers ever encountered these other humans remains unknown. The mysteries of this stage are many. What kinds of watercraft were used? Were crossings made by small groups scouting ahead or by entire communities moving together? Did they carry supplies or rely on fishing and foraging from the start? The archaeological record, shaped by tides and tropical weather, is thin. Yet the presence of humans on islands far beyond any land bridge confirms that such journeys were made. From a planetary perspective, these crossings are part of a broader wave. In the north, people move into cooler forests and open plains. In the west, others adapt to deserts and mountain valleys. Here, the path runs across salt water, along a ribbon of islands that leads towards Sahul, the joined lands of New Guinea and Australia. Life on the islands demands flexibility. Some are large, with rivers, game, and varied plants. Others are small, their resources quickly exhausted if not managed carefully. Groups may move seasonally between islands, fishing in one place, gathering sago or yams in another, hunting pigs or deer where they are found. A quiet fact ties this all together. Certain species of plants and animals found on multiple islands are known to be human introductions, yams, taro, and even some fruit trees may have been carried deliberately, planted in new places to ensure food on later visits. Oh, this hints at long-term planning, not just survival in the moment, but an understanding of how to shape the environment for future use. Toolkits shift again. The stone available on some islands is coarse or brittle, limiting the range of shapes that can be made. In such cases, bamboo and shell may have played larger roles, though they leave few traces today. On islands with volcanic rock, fine-grained stone allows for sharp blades and points, similar to those found on the mainland. The scale of travel here is measured in hours or days at sea, depending on currents and weather. Routes likely hugged coastlines when possible, using smaller islands as waypoints. Knowledge of these routes would have been precious, passed from one generation to the next in memory and practice. At night, campfires glow on beaches where the forest meets the sand. Boats or rafts are pulled above the tide line. The air smells of salt and wood smoke. Waves hiss on the reef. The stars are bright in the equatorial sky, mirrored faintly in the water. Navigation by these stars may have been part of the skill set, not in abstract charts, but in lived familiarity with their rising and setting points. From the last of these stepping stone islands, the coast of Sahul is not visible. The open water between is wide enough that the far shore lies beyond sight. To cross it would be to commit to a voyage whose end could not be seen at the start. And yet, at some point, it was done. The first people landed on new shores, carrying with them the accumulated knowledge of generations who had moved along coasts and across smaller straits. The story of that final crossing, the one into Sahul, belongs to the next chapter. It is a chapter shaped by the meeting of two worlds, the adaptation to landscapes never before touched by our species, and the continuation of a journey that began thousands of kilometers to the west, in the highlands of Africa. The sea between the last islands of Wallacea and the first visible mountains of Sahul is wide, deep, and restless. Currents flow strongly here, funneled between the land masses. Tides rise and fall with force, and storms can form with little warning. Yet, at some point in this distant past, people made the crossing. The far shore was not visible from the departure point. The voyage required trust in skill, in memory, and in the knowledge passed down from those who had navigated shorter channels before. Archaeological evidence in Sahul shows that humans were present here at least 65,000 years ago. This means that the crossing from Wallacea happened no later than that, and perhaps earlier. The landing points could have been on the northern coast of what is now Australia, the southern coast of New Guinea, or both. With sea levels far lower than today, the two lands were joined in a single continent, stretching from the tropical north to temperate grasslands and deserts in the south. On arrival, the newcomers stepped into an unfamiliar world, the plants, the animals, Even the soils were different from anything west of the deep water channels they had crossed. Giant marsupials grazed on open plains. Massive flightless birds stalked through grass and scrub. Reptiles larger than any the travellers had seen basked along rivers and billabongs. A lesser-known detail comes from archaeological sites in northern Sahul, where tools made from volcanic stone match sources many kilometres inland. This means that early arrivals quickly explored beyond the coast, seeking the best materials for cutting and shaping. It also suggests a mobility that extended well past the landing zones within a few generations. The mysteries here are profound. How many crossings were made? Were they accidental, the result of storms driving people off course, or were they planned? With supplies and water carried deliberately, did multiple groups arrive over centuries, or was there a single wave that spread rapidly across the land? The answers remain debated, shaped by fragmentary archaeological evidence and by genetic patterns in modern and ancient populations. From a planetary perspective, this was still an Ice Age world. In the far north, glaciers locked up water, keeping the seas low. In the tropics, monsoon belts shifted with orbital cycles, affecting rainfall across Sahul's vast interior. Some regions were green and well-watered, others were dry, with seasonal rivers and lakes that could vanish in drought years. The first people to explore Sahul would have learned its patterns quickly. They would have found coastal mangroves and mudflats rich in shellfish and fish. Inland, they would have followed rivers and streams to permanent waterholes. On open plains, they would have tracked herds of grazing animals, learning their seasonal movements. Toolkits adapted to local resources. Stone was used where it was available, but in many places, hardwoods and animal bones may have taken on greater roles. Fire was central, used not only for cooking and warmth, but also for managing vegetation. Controlled burns could open travel corridors, encourage the growth of edible plants, and attract game to fresh shoots. One quiet fact is the speed with which humans reached the far south of Sahul. Sites in what is now Tasmania, connected to the mainland at this time, show human presence within a few thousand years of arrival in the north. This suggests that the skills and mobility developed over thousands of kilometers of earlier migrations continued here without pause. The landscape itself offered vast variety. In the north, tropical forests and savannas alternated with wetlands. In the center, arid zones demanded precise knowledge of water sources. In the south, temperate woodlands and grasslands provided different foods and materials. The ability to move between these zones, to store and share knowledge of each, would have been essential. Nights in this new land brought unfamiliar sounds, the calls of marsupials, the hiss of wind through eucalyptus leaves, the distant splash of crocodiles in the rivers. Fires burned in camps along coasts and waterways, their smoke rising into skies unmarked by city light. Stars overhead were the same as those seen from Africa and Asia, but their patterns shifted in the southern hemisphere. Some constellations tilted or newly risen above the horizon. From the perspective of deep time, the crossing into Sahul marks one of the greatest expansions in human history. It required not only the ability to adapt to new environments, but also the willingness to face a journey into the unseen. The knowledge that made it possible of winds, currents, tides, and navigation by landmarks and stars was the accumulation of countless smaller steps taken over generations. Here, at the edge of a new continent, the story continues inland, across mountains, rivers, deserts, and forests. The people who made this crossing would leave traces in every one of these landscapes, shaping and being shaped by the land itself. From the northern shores of Sahul, the land opens into a vast interior. Here, rivers run brown and slow, their banks lined with paperbark trees and pandanus. Wetlands stretch out in the wet season, crowded with waterbirds. When the dry comes, many pools shrink or vanish, and the land cracks under the sun. The first people to move inland learned quickly that survival depended on knowing every source of water. Permanent springs, shaded under rock ledges, could be the difference between life and death in the dry months. Seasonal billabongs, full after the rains, could still hold fish and turtles long after their surface water was gone. To the west, the land narrows into rocky ridges and sandstone plateaus. Shelters under overhanging cliffs provide shade and protection from rain. Here, early traces of human presence remain in the form of stone tools and hearths. Some sites also contain pigment stains on the rock red, yellow, and black, perhaps the beginnings of a long tradition of painting, though their exact age and meaning are still debated. A lesser-known detail comes from the charred remains of seeds and tubers found in ancient hearths. These show that people were processing and eating plants that required cooking to make them safe or palatable. This knowledge would have been essential in a land where not all foods could be eaten raw without risk. The questions multiply when we consider the pace of movement. Did the first generations to land in Sahul spread inland immediately, or did coastal populations expand slowly, sending small groups to explore the rivers and plains? Some evidence points to rapid spread, with sites thousands of kilometers apart, occupied within a few millennia. Other interpretations suggest that many regions remained unoccupied until climatic shifts made them more hospitable. From the planetary perspective, Sahul's interior was shaped by Ice Age climates. Rainfall patterns shifted over centuries, alternately greening and drying the heart of the continent. In wetter phases, grasslands expanded and rivers ran stronger. In drier phases, dunes advanced and lakes shrank into salt pans. The people who lived here adapted by moving between regions, following seasonal abundance. In the east, the highlands of New Guinea rise steeply from the lowlands. Valleys between the mountains hold rich soils and permanent streams. Forests climb the slopes, giving way to grasslands in the highest basins. Even in the earliest periods of human presence, these valleys likely provided reliable resources game, edible plants, and building materials. Steep ridges and deep gorges, however, made travel slow and demanding. Tool traditions in Sahul varied by region. In rocky areas, stone tools were abundant and often finely worked. In places with limited stone, other materials took precedence: hardwoods for digging sticks and spear shafts, shells for cutting edges, and bone for points and awls. Many of these organic tools have not survived, but their former presence is suggested by wear marks on surviving artifacts and by ethnographic parallels from later times. A quiet but telling fact emerges from the pattern of site locations. Even in the most arid parts of Sahul, evidence of human presence clusters near reliable water sources so consistently that archaeologists can predict where to look by following modern maps of springs and seeps. This reflects a deep, inherited knowledge of the land passed down over many lifetimes. The diversity of environments in Sahul meant that no single survival strategy fit all. Along the northern coasts, fishing and gathering shellfish could sustain communities year-round. In the inland plains, mobility was key, moving with the rains and the availability of game. In the mountains, the cooler climate allowed for the storage of some foods, perhaps in sheltered caches or by drying, Evening on the interior plains is marked by a sudden drop in temperature. Heat drains into the clear night sky, and the air cools enough for dew to form before dawn. Fires burn in hollows sheltered from the wind, their light flickering on nearby rocks. Above, the southern stars form patterns new to human eyes, constellations of this hemisphere, never seen from Africa, Arabia, or Asia. These inland journeys were not the end of movement. Over generations, people reached every corner of Sahul, from the tropical north to the windswept south, from the deserts at its heart to the forests of the east. Each landscape demanded its own knowledge, its own rhythms of movement, its own ways of reading the sky, water, and soil. The expansion across Sahul was one of the most remarkable feats in the story of our species, not because it was a single, swift migration, but because it was a patient, adaptive process that unfolded over millennia. It was built on countless small decisions, each grounded in the knowledge of the land and sea gained in the long journey from Africa. From here, the story will turn toward other branches of humanity's path to lands still beyond reach in this age, and to the enduring mysteries of how people shaped and were shaped by the worlds they entered. The great expanse of Sahul is now fully part of the human map. From the tropical wetlands of the north to the cool forests of the south, people have settled into its rhythms. They know where water will linger after rain, which trees bear fruit in which season, and which animals can be hunted without depleting the herds. Yet movement never stops. Seasonal journeys remain essential from inland plains to coastal estuaries, from highland valleys to lowland rivers. Each path is marked in memory: a bend in a river, a distinctive rock, a grove where birds nest at the same time each year. Along the northern coasts, the sea is a constant companion. Mangroves line the tidal creeks, their roots a tangle alive with crabs and small fish. Beyond the reefs, larger fish migrate with the seasons, drawing people out in canoes or rafts when the weather allows. On shore, shell middens grow over generations, marking places where families return again and again. A lesser-known detail from these coasts is the presence of dugong bones in some early sites. These slow-moving marine mammals, grazing on seagrass in shallow bays, would have been a valuable source of meat and fat. Hunting them required knowledge of tides, patience, and cooperative effort. Their remains, mixed with fish and turtle bones, speak of a broad use of coastal resources. Inland, the central deserts remain challenging. Waterholes can lie hundreds of kilometers apart. Travel between them requires careful timing with the rains and the ability to find food in sparse country. Seeds from desert grasses can be ground into flour, roots can be dug for moisture. Small game can be hunted with spears or traps. The mysteries of this period lie not only in survival, but in adaptation over the long term. Did people here manage landscapes deliberately using fire to shape plant growth, to attract game, to maintain open travel routes? Later traditions across Sahul suggest this was the case, but how early it began is debated. Some archaeologists see signs of burning in ancient charcoal layers that might indicate such practices. Others caution that natural fires could leave similar traces. From a planetary perspective, the Ice Age world continues to shift. Rain belts move over centuries, making some regions more favorable and others more marginal. Sea levels stayed low, keeping the coastlines far from their modern positions. In the far south, the island of Tasmania is still connected to the mainland, its temperate forests part of the greater continent. To the east, the land narrows into the highlands and valleys of New Guinea. Here, the air is cooler at altitude, and the soil in the basins is rich. Streams run clear year-round. Evidence from later periods will show some of the earliest signs of plant cultivation in the world. But in this age, people still move between hunting, gathering, and possibly encouraging the growth of favored plants near camps. Tool traditions remain diverse. In the stone-rich regions, finely worked points and scrapers are common. In forested areas with little stone, bamboo, shell, and bone take on a greater role. Fishing gear may include hooks carved from shell and plant fiber lines twisted for strength, though direct evidence is rare in sites of this age. A quiet fact stands out in the distribution of sites. Even in the most remote parts of Sahul, traces of human presence appear within a few thousand years of the first arrival. This suggests not just exploration, but an enduring occupation, even in regions where the environment was demanding. Coastal and inland life remain linked. People from the interior may travel to the sea during certain seasons, bringing inland materials like stone or ochre to exchange for shell, salt, or coastal foods. These exchanges help maintain connections across wide distances, ensuring that no group is entirely isolated. Evenings across the continent are marked by the light of fires. In the north, flames reflect off calm tidal waters. In the deserts, they flicker against the walls of shallow caves or the sides of rock outcrops. In the mountains, they glow through the mist that gathers after sunset. Each fire represents a camp for the night, a pause in movement, a gathering of knowledge and resources before the next day's travel or work. The human presence here is now secure. It has endured drought and flood, adapted to coasts and deserts, learned the shape of a land unlike any before. Yet the wider world is still changing. In other parts of the globe, humans are moving into colder regions, encountering new landscapes and sometimes other human lineages. The story will soon turn to those other branches, to the meeting points of our species with Neanderthals and Denisovans, to the shared and separate paths that shaped humanity's deep past. But for now, in Sahul, the fires burn steady, the knowledge of land and sea deepens, and the journey that began in the Rift Valley continues without pause. The Ice Age world remains vast and varied. In Africa, small bands still move between savannas, rivers, and coasts. In Eurasia, some of our species are beginning to enter lands already inhabited by other humans, Neanderthals in the west, Denisovans in the east. In Sahul, the first generations born entirely on this continent know no other home. Here, the cycle of movement continues as it has for millennia. On the northern coasts, wet season rains flood the rivers, filling lagoons and wetlands with life. Fish run in abundance, birds arrive in great numbers to feed and breed. In the dry season, the waters recede, and people move inland along the shaded courses of streams. A lesser-known detail from this period comes from inland shelters where layers of ash and charcoal are interleaved with thin deposits of windblown sand. These suggest periods when people left the shelter, perhaps during the driest months, and returned when conditions improved. The pattern reflects a mobility finely tuned to seasonal and climatic cycles. In the far south, Tasmania is still part of the mainland. Cool, temperate forests and coastal dunes offer shellfish, seals, and seabirds alongside inland hunting. Later, when seas rise, this connection will be cut, and its people will live in isolation for thousands of years. But in this time, movement between regions is still possible. and materials including distinctive types of stone travel with those who carry them. The mysteries here concern the scale of connection. Did groups in distant parts of Sahul know of each other only through indirect exchange? Or did some journeys span the entire continent over many generations? The archaeological record shows shared tool types and materials moving across long distances. But whether these reflect direct contact or a chain of exchanges remains unclear. From a planetary perspective, the great ice sheets in the north are near their maximum extent. Sea levels are as low as they will be for tens of thousands of years. This creates broad coastal plains, exposes river mouths far beyond the modern shoreline, and brings some islands closer than they will ever be again. At the same time, global climates are cooler, and in some regions, drier. In the highlands of New Guinea, cooler air and fertile valleys provide reliable resources. People here may have begun encouraging certain plants to grow near camps, clearing small patches for yams, taro, or bananas. Though not yet agriculture in the later sense, such practices could mark the early stages of a deeper relationship between humans and plants. Tool traditions remain adapted to place. In rocky inland regions, large cutting flakes and scrapers dominate. In coastal zones, smaller, more delicate tools may have been used for working shell, plant fiber, and fish processing. Organic tools, spears, digging sticks, containers are essential, though their absence from the record is a reminder of the limits of what survives in deep time. A quiet fact emerges from studies of ancient fire patterns. In some regions, the vegetation shows signs of regular burning that cannot easily be explained by lightning alone. This controlled use of fire would have shaped plant communities, encouraged certain foods, and maintained open travel corridors, a deliberate engagement with the land that reflects long-term planning. Life across Sahul is as much about memory as it is about immediate survival, knowledge of where to find water, when certain plants ripen, when animals migrate, and how to navigate by landmarks and stars is carried in the minds of each generation. Stories, songs, and shared practices encode this information in ways that endure far longer than individual lifetimes. Evening settles across the continent in countless small scenes. A fire crackles under a rock overhang, sending sparks into the cool night air. Smoke drifts over a calm bay where dugongs graze in the moonlight. Somewhere in the interior, a family rests beside a spring that has flowed for generations. Above them, the southern stars arc slowly across the sky, constant in their motion, silent in their watch. From the first steps out of Africa to the farthest reaches of Sahul, the journey of our species in this age has been one of patience, adaptability, and curiosity. It has crossed deserts and mountains, coasts and forests, rivers and open seas. It has required the sharing of knowledge, the shaping of tools, and the reading of landscapes on a planetary scale. In time, these same qualities will carry humans into the cold north, into lands of ice and tundra, into contact and sometimes competition with other human kinds. But the foundations for those later chapters have already been laid here, in the long migration that began more than 70,000 years ago. The path of our species is not a single line, but a web of roots, each shaped by climate, geography, and chance. The story of this age, the age when Homo sapiens nearly vanished, then spread across the world, is one of resilience, written on the land itself.